To start this hot stove, I think it's fitting that we start with Ken Holland because the gentlemen up on this stage are going to be in Vancouver next week. And that's, I guess, your first major assignment, as it were, as the general manager of the hockey club. So to that end, we solicited from season seat holders some of the topics they wanted to discuss, and that was right at the top of the list. Your plans for the draft and your priorities next week in Vancouver.
Well, obviously we got pick 8. We're going to get a really good player. That's the great news. I think we've got some good young defensemen in the organization, and you know, people talk philosophy. Do you go for the best player? Do you go for position? I think that there's a lot of players that are really close, and I knew that we're going to add a really good young player to the organization. At the same time, we need to make our team better for the 19-20 season. I've been on the phone here for the last couple of weeks with general managers around the league. Any trades or moves that come in the NHL, for the most part, come when you're in Vancouver at the draft. So I've had an opportunity to understand what the other managers want to accomplish, what we're trying to accomplish. We got to get deeper up front. Certainly we got to get another goaltender. So we got a 2-goaltender system. And I think those are the most important things over the next 10 days. And then obviously right after that is July 1st is unrestricted free agency, and we're certainly going to explore the market to see if there's a player or two that can make us better.
All right, Ken, I'll paraphrase a question here from season seat holder John Klingel, who also asked a question along the lines of positional need. So a question I would have is, has that changed since the salary cap? You know, historically it was always draft the best player. Does the salary cap perhaps change things a little bit in that regard? And then part 2 of that, how, because you spent a lot of time with the U.S. National Development Program by being so close to you in Detroit, how challenging is it to evaluate those kids versus maybe the one-offs, a kid, you know, that's playing in Kootenay, Peyton Krebs on a real tough team? So two-parter there for you.
Well, you've talked, one of the things that's tough about the amateur draft for the amateur scouts is evaluating a player that's playing in a men's league in Finland versus somebody that's playing in the USHL versus the BCHL for major juniors. So ultimately that's the challenge, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why the entry draft is difficult. And when you look at the guide and record book, it's not right spot on. I do know if you're going to be a good team, you got to draft good. And as I've said here earlier, I'm excited about the young defensemen in the organization. Bouchard, Samorukov. There's some young players young defensemen in Bakersfield that I watched play a couple of games in the playoffs. So certainly that's a position of strength going forward. Now, philosophically, do you take another defenseman at pick 8 and add to the group because the good teams are really good on the back end and really deep? Certainly we saw that last night with both teams that were in the Stanley Cup Finals. Or do you go out and draft a forward? We can use both. Everybody can use both. The more depth you have, the more good players you have, the better your team's going to be. So I think that answers part 1. What was the first part?
Part 2 was just evaluating a kid like Peyton Krebs playing on a team in Kootenay that wasn't very good this year versus a stacked all-star team with that U.S. National Development Program.
It was good to see Krebs over at the World Under-18s. He got to play with lots of good Canadian players. You know, that's what makes the draft difficult. But certainly Krebs is a really good player. So we're excited about. You know, I think if you analyze the draft, obviously there's 2 players at the top of the draft that everybody's talking about, and then I think that there's probably there's 7, 8, 9 players that are really close. For the next cluster, the next group, we're going to get one of them.
Thank you, Ken. One note, I've just been told the prize table everyone's already registered. It sounds like the prize table, we're taking it down right now, so you don't have to worry about doing anything. You're already automatically entered by virtue of your attendance here. So hopefully you'll be getting a call on Monday with one of the prizes that you probably saw on your way in. Dave, Ken's sitting right next to you, and there's several hundred people here tonight that are probably wondering what you want on the hockey club next year. So give me the Coles notes of how you'd assess the roster, and if you were nagging Ken for a present under the tree, what would it be?
Well, there's some real good pieces under the tree already, which is a pleasant as a coach coming in. Everybody talks about the two, McDavid and Draisaitl, but when you look at this team, there's a real good core underneath that also. Klefbom, Larson, Nurse, Nugent Hopkins. There's a real good nucleus underneath that. Kenny already mentioned it. I think the number one need for us is just some depth at that forward group. And if you look at the two teams in the finals this year, and we were laughing about it last night as the game started, you're going into Game 7 of the finals, and both teams started their fourth line to start the game, right? Now that's depth. We need some of that depth, right? That's how you're going to compete. So we have high-end talent. We've got some good, real good pieces underneath, but we just need to add some of that depth to push us along. There's going to be nights when McDavid and Draisaitl aren't going to be the only guys that score. We need some more depth throughout the whole lineup and find ways to win that way. So that's the biggest concern, and Kenny and I have long talked about that, and we think we can get that done this summer.
This next question is also from another season seat holder. I apologize if I mispronounced the name. It happens once in a while. I think it's Garrett Neisen, and it's for Dave Tippett. Dave, given your previous support in the field of statistics and analytics and the NHL's movement to improve player tracking, what is your current standing on developing statistics in an analytics department and how important it is?
Well, I think it's very important, and before a lot of people started talking about it, I retired from Philadelphia in 1994, and I started doing analytics in 95 as a player coach in Houston. So I've been doing it a long time. I've looked at a lot of different things over the years. I think it's an important tool to use to evaluate players, evaluate your team game. Now, as it's grown, what's happened, there's been a lot of stats that have been thrown out there that some of it I don't think is real valuable. But the stuff that is really hands-on, where you get in the video machine, I've been doing it for a long time. I'm going to continue to do it. I've evaluated teams that way with that tool for a long, long time. And as more and more of these things become available to you, especially with the NHL, all the new stuff that they're coming out, it's going to continue to evolve, and we'll be right at the top of the evolution of that. It's a great tool to evaluate, like I say, your team game, and individual players really like information. Today's player, they want information, they want to see how things are going, and we'll be at the forefront of that.
Tom, a lot of people are going to have some requests for you later on music-wise. We'll get to that a little bit. But, you know, it's funny, Bob was talking about it. Your experience with MLSE kind of dominates your resume, for better or for worse. But there's some real roots for you here in oil country and in Western Canada. Can you kind of enlighten us that you're not just a Toronto guy?
Sure. And first of all, thank you all for being here tonight, and thanks for the warm Edmonton welcome that all three of us have had. It's been really terrific, and we're all really thrilled to be here. And you know, I called Ken before I took the job, in fact, and we compared notes, and both of us really saw the timing and the opportunity, just something that was really, really exciting. So we're all really delighted to be here, and thank you for the warm welcome. I'm born and raised in Toronto, but I ended up in university in Saskatchewan, and had a wonderful time there. I lived there for almost 10 years, but just before that, or just after that, I guess it was during that, I ended up, one of my first jobs was in Hinton, Alberta, working on the Obed Mountain coal mining project, in fact, with a bunch of guys, some of which who ended up being very close friends and mentors. And while that was happening, it was 1983, and I remember vividly, I was telling Bob this story after we did the deal with Jurgen, that we were there at 83, and we were watching this Oilers team lose 4 straight to the Islanders, and little did we know that that was the end of the Islander dynasty and the start of what was the last great dynasty in the NHL. And so here we are 35 years later, full circle, and on the precipice, I think, of something really exciting. So we're really excited to be here, and going to have a lot of fun.
Tom, this is another question for you. Earlier this year, the Oilers hosted several season seat holder events, and a reoccurring theme, big topic, was guest experience. And on that note, can you tell us what you think? I mean, we've got a lot of our clients here that have been incredibly loyal. What you think excellent guest experience and customer service means to you?
Well, we can talk about this for a long time. You know, in my world, the business starts and ends with what these gentlemen do, right? I mean, it's all about the team and the product, and so we're there to serve them and to serve the fans. And so, you know, the fans come here to see this team and go away happy. And so the product is obviously a big important part of it. We can't always control the outcome, so everything we do around that is important. You know, part of the reason I took this job was, aside from working with the people here, but what's in place. And you look at this building, and you look at the ice district here, and the potential to I mean, this is as great as it gets anywhere in the world. Like, this is really spectacular. And so to take that as kind of your palette, and then lay on that, you know, the paint that these guys are going to paint on it, and then put around that all the service and great food and all those kind of things. And I don't know where we are. I've been to one game here that was a year and a half ago. And so we'll be assessing that for sure. And it's all about continuous improvement. I've opened 4 of these buildings, and, you know, every one of them you get better every year. And it takes, you know, the first couple of years you just hope not to burn the place down. The second couple of years it's about getting better. And then the third couple of years you really start to get good at it and efficient and really deliver a great experience. And I think, you know, that's kind of where we are right now. So it's going to be a good couple of years. We're looking forward to it.
Ken, I remember at your introductory press conference, there was a question from the media that echoed a lot of the fans' concerns with respect to the Oilers' cap worries. And you said, you know, all due respect, the other 30 teams in the National Hockey League, we all have cap worries. Everyone has cap worries. So to that end, Doug Buehler, one of our season seat holders, was wondering, from your perspective, and you mentioned July 1, you know, what is your priority list, and how does the salary cap come into play in terms of a guy who might be available after July 1, how he fits on your roster with the constraints that you face here in Edmonton?
You know, we're going to have some cap space. When you look, you know, you look at the 2 teams that played last night, Boston and St. Louis. One of the ingredients in having a real good team is you have to have some younger players on your team or some cheaper players on your team that make your team better, make your team deeper. Everybody can't be highly paid. So at the end of the day, we're looking for some players that can play in the bottom part of the roster that are cheaper. We're going to look at free agency. We're going to look at trades. Is there players in the system that can do that? So we've got, as Dave was talking here, we've got a great core. We've got to build around that core. We've got a deep defense, and we got to go to get a goaltender. So I believe we're going to have enough cap space to do the things that we're going to want to do. But ultimately, again, I'm back to the good organizations: draft, develop. That's where the most of your players have got to come through. You supplement it. You got to comb through the free agency, and maybe not as July 1st. Maybe it's July 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th as players are out there in the market, and you find the right fits for your hockey team. So everybody's got cap problems and cap challenges. That's just the nature of running a team in the National Hockey League in the salary cap era.
All right, the next question, some would say, is a $100 million question, and it comes to us from Gary Ennis. And my guess is it's a question that a lot of the people here have right now. Ken, if you can provide us an update, if you have one. What is the current status of Connor McDavid's injury, and are things progressing as is expected?
Well, he's doing good. I've seen him twice this week. 10 days ago, I drove to Toronto and spent 2.5, 3 hours with Connor, having lunch and talking to him. And then this week on Monday, I was in Toronto for 2 days, Tuesday with the competition committee, but I went up on Monday to spend time with Connor again and see where he works out. He's doing good. He's rehabbing. Expect to see him on the ice in training camp. Working very closely with our medical team and the medical people that he's got in Toronto to make sure that he's getting the best care possible. And he's in great spirits, and I really enjoyed meeting him. It's the first time that I'd really got to spend more than shaking his hand in the hallway on a visiting team. So he's doing great, and looking forward to being on the ice in training camp.
Dave, especially in the latter half of your tenure in Arizona, you were often, you know, entrusted with maximizing the most offense out of a lineup that quite frankly doesn't have the same kind of weaponry that you inherit here in Edmonton. And the perception, and we had quite a few season ticket holders, you get this label defensive coach, and You know, I think back to some of those Arizona teams, very similar to the Arizona team this year with all the injuries, where you got guys like Brad Richardson leading your team in goal scoring. So once and for all, can you address that label as fair, unfair, or somewhere in the middle?
I laugh at it all the time because my first head coach job in the NHL, I was hired in Dallas from Los Angeles because I ran the power play and I was an offensive guy. So I got hired in Dallas as an offensive guy, and we had good teams. I mean, my center ice was Medano, Arnott, and Turgeon were my top three centers. And then we had Zubov. We had a real high-octane team. So I was hired as an offensive guy because of the things I did in the power play. And then I went to Arizona, and we had a good team, a lot of grinders, good goaltenders, and it's the coach's responsibility to maximize every player. You got to maximize the talent of every player, and you look at your talent group and see what you have, and you come up with a plan to try to win. In Arizona, great goaltending, veteran defense, good grinding forwards. We were going to try to win grinding. That's the only way we could, and we were successful at it. The first 4 or 5 years in Arizona, we were really successful, and then we started to go young. They took a lot of the veteran players away, trying to rebuild, and it's a challenge that way. But every coach's responsibility is to look at the players you have and try to win. How are you going to win with this? And I'm looking forward to looking down the bench and say, Connor, you and that Draisaitl guy, you can go now. You know, it's It's a little easier that way.
This question's for Tom, and it pertains, as many of you know, and I'm going to guess a bunch of you probably want to get rolling by about 7 o'clock. It's Game 6 of the NBA Final tonight. It's acceptable to cheer for Toronto tonight. I think we can agree on that.
Last time, though.
Yes. But you were involved, obviously, in getting Jurassic Park set up and Maple Leaf Square in the city of Toronto. Can you shed some insight, perhaps, on that experience and how that might translate to growth here in Edmonton in Ice District?
Well, first of all, what's going on around the whole sports scene in North America is actually kind of spilled out of that. St. Louis the other night, we saw at a full arena, 10,000 people in a baseball stadium while it's pouring rain while they're playing in Boston. I mean, it's unbelievable. So the whole idea of experiencing sports outside of the arena but close to it has become a real phenomenon. And I guess it started with what we did there. Interestingly, with the Ice District here, what we've got here is a way better asset and a way better sort of starting point for that. So we're going to be able to do a lot of that here. I was at Game 1 of the Raptors series this year. It's really spectacular what's going on there, and tonight should be a lot of fun, and we're going to shut up as quickly as possible so you can all go watch it, but we'll see what happens.
We've got time for a few more questions, and again, the season seed holders, they just came pouring out of you, and Ken, you can imagine that a few questions concerned, all right, how's it going to work with Keith Gretzky now remaining within the organization? I think I have a feeling what the answer is, but based on your initial comments about Keith, but you've had a chance to meet with him right now, and how do you see the two of you working together moving forward?
Well, I got to know Keith. First off, been around a long time, so I talked to a lot of people in the industry that have either worked with Keith or knew Keith, and everybody come back, hard worker, great eye for talent, humble guy, team player. And then after I was announced at the press conference, I went to San Diego to watch Bakersfield play San Diego, and we spent a few hours together there each of the days that I was there. And ultimately, over the course of a couple weeks, Keith felt that he wanted to be part of my staff, and I was excited for him to be part of the staff. So Keith is, as the assistant general manager, going to have a couple of main real responsibilities. He's going to oversee Bakersfield, be general manager of Bakersfield, and then he's got a real good eye for talent. As we you get Bakersfield going in the second half of the season, he's going to get involved with the amateur draft and help our amateur team as we work our way to the draft. So he's another strong voice in the room as we prepare for future drafts. So those were things that were important to him. He loved being involved with Bakersfield. It's important in building this organization that we're going to have a competitive team down at Bakersfield, real good veteran players. I think the playoff series this year when I went down Bouchard going and playing in that playoff series, and the young players in there, Benson and some of the other players, is really critical to the development of young players. So it's important that we have a real good situation in Bakersfield. He's going to oversee that, work very closely with Jay Woodcroft and the coaches down there. And then, again, the second half of the season, get involved in the amateur draft, because it's important. If we're going to build something here special, we got to knock it out of the park at the draft table going forward.
And I'm going to just follow up on Bakersfield. Yesterday, Jay Woodcroft, you extended his contract. Just a thought on what you saw. I mean, you had all that success in Grand Rapids. Todd Nelson won you a Calder Cup a couple of years ago. But it's not just having the personnel. You got to have the right environment with the coach as well. Yeah,
I'm fortunate. Jay Woodcroft's first job in professional hockey was with the Red Wings. Mike Babcock hired him in like 2005-06 to be the video coach of the Detroit Red Wings. And then after about 2 or 3 years, Todd McClellan went to San Jose to be the head coach and took Jay with him to be an assistant coach. So I've got a relationship with Todd that goes back to, back over a decade. And certainly when he was named the head coach of Bakersfield a year ago, I watched from afar, and I wanted to see how what he was going to do in his first opportunity to run his own bench, and he did an unbelievable job. I think at one point in time, did they win 18 in a row in the league, and went to the second round of the playoffs. The young players got better. They developed a great culture down there, and I think that's a real credit to Jay, but also to the staff that he put together. And again, the American Hockey League team is critical to the development of your young players, and we're going to have more and more young players going into Bakersfield. So certainly that team, that organization, and Keith Gretzky and Jay Woodcroft and the staff there is going to be really critical to long-term success here in Edmonton.
Now, Dave, you can't blame me for this. Ken brought up coaching, and I've gotten some messages from season seat holders. Don't let Tip off the hook. They want to know how you're filling out your assistant coaching roster. Glenn Gulletson back, but who else is coming?
We're in the process right now. When we started talking about it, I had a history with Gully in Dallas. He was a young coach just coming in to Dallas when I was leaving Dallas. Really bright young coach. I've talked to a lot of the players about everything that's gone on here, so I really took some valuable information from them also.
Were they advocates for him? Is that factor in your decision?
Yeah, it was. He really took a big bite of the power play last year, one of the real bright spots of their season last year. So you talk to the players on that. They really enjoyed what he did, thought he was very insightful, so we decided to keep him. I really feel like I'd like to have some people on the staff that I know well. So we're going to work towards that. Ken and I have been talking about that for the last couple of weeks. So we're going to work to some of those things, and we'll find some resolutions here fairly quickly, I hope. Yeah, and Jeremy Kupel is video guy is back. Dustin Schwartz, goaltender, is here also. So both real high qualified guys, come with great resumes, and spent some time with both of them already. They're top-notch people here. So I think our staff will come together. We'll have a very good staff.
Dave, we got a question from season seat holder Mitch Dull, who wants to know, how will you handle, this is a question you've been asked before with the media, but just with McDavid and Draisaitl. You have a philosophical approach. Leon scored 50 goals this year. His possession metrics when he was on his own were pretty good. But does he have to play center? What's sort of the philosophy that you're going to have with that?
Well, first of all, we're going to see how the rest of the lineup kind of sorts itself out, because as a coach, just like I talked earlier, you look at what you have and you try to, how are we going to find a way to win? I'll go back to the one story I did tell on the day I was hired here, in working with the North American under-23 team, where Connor was a part of, and I was assistant coach there. We tried different people with Connor, and we had Austin Matthews, who at that time hadn't even played a game in the NHL yet, had played in Europe, and we weren't sure where he fit in the lineup. He was an unknown to us. And I asked Austin if he played any wing after we tried 2 or 3 guys with Connor, and he goes, I'll play anywhere just to play. So we tried him on the wing with Connor, and they just took off. I don't know if you remember those last couple of games in that tournament. They were phenomenal together.
The goal against Sweden.
Yeah.
They had a defense perfectly.
And I see Draisaitl and Matthews very similar in their style of play, very similar. So there's part of me that's leaning like, hey, these two are great together. Why would we break them up? But ultimately, we got to see, when I see the whole palette, how are we gonna find a way to win here? But it's obvious they have great chemistry together. They like playing with each other. So we'll let that play out. But I guarantee you, at some point, they're going to spend a lot of time together.
There's been a couple of words that have crept into sporting lexicon in the last decade that I find almost cliche now. Every team is suddenly a group, and every organization suddenly needs to find the right culture. And we've had some questions from season seed holders, and I'll start with Tom, but I also want Ken to weigh on this from the hockey side. Having been part of MLSE and having been part of a Red Wings machine, what does that word culture mean to you? And in terms of initial impressions, does it, quote unquote, need to be fixed?
Well, culture is an interesting phenomenon. I think it's probably the most important thing in any organizational behavior in any group of people. And so it's one of the great things of our business is the fact that the business world is very similar to the sports world in a lot of ways, right? You know, they have a very clear goal. They have a set of values that and things that they'll do that are appropriate behaviors to ultimately succeed on the ice. And our business is a lot the same, right? So, so we're looking at the values of the organization and what are those? What are the acceptable and desired organizational behaviors that'll allow us to ultimately get to the finish line? And that really is what ends up defining culture. And you hire the right people, you give them the right roadmap, and you typically end up with the right results. And so we got lots of great people here. I'm 4 days into it and still figuring everything out, but we've got lots of great people here. We've got all the ingredients, right? So it's a matter of weaving it all together based on that kind of culture, which is the foundation of what you do.
And on the hockey side, when did you start notice that Detroit had it right, and how do you define it?
Culture to me is people, players, and doing it right. Every day, day after day after day. So, and then the veteran players teach the younger players how to go about the business of being pros. It's about the jersey. It's about doing it right for your team to win games on a regular basis. Culture, obviously, the winning teams have culture, and those teams that don't have it are kind of searching for culture. But I think ultimately it's about the people doing it right on an everyday basis. And I think if you can have some veteran players in your locker room that do it right, that are role models and mentors for the younger people, those people can be big for your culture.
Ken, you've had a lot of success with Scandinavian players, primarily Swedes over the years. Is it possible
and Russians,
yes. There was 5 of them that were pretty good, as we recall. But just a thought on Jesse Puljujärvi and the patience required versus perhaps external pressures that get applied. How unique of a balance is that to get the most out of it? Because Jesse Puljujärvi is probably the player I get asked the most about, just generally around town and on our show on a daily basis. So that's kind of a unique scenario right now with them.
Yeah, what you're talking about is player development, and those players that can go from the draft table in a short order onto an NHL team and have a big impact and play minutes, that player development's easy. And the players that struggle for a bit, it's trying to get them to. I'm going to go back. I was on a radio show with Bob McCowan at the Lottery. And Bob said to me, what's the hardest thing about evaluating young players for the draft? And I said, trying to figure out how they're going to deal with adversity, because most of the players that we're looking at the age of 18 have had success. That's why they're in the entry draft. They're the head of the class of their peer group. So adversity lies ahead, and how they're going to deal with adversity, how the organization, how the people are going to deal with adversity. So Jesse was obviously a player that 4th overall, incredibly talented player, and he wakes up 3 years later at the age of 21, and the career hasn't gone the way everybody has expected it to go. we gotta stick with it. And Tip and I were talking about it yesterday, and Jesse was here yesterday. I spent about an hour with him talking to him. You got to come to the rink every day, know your jersey's hanging. That's hanging you're in the lineup. You're in the lineup. That's step one. What do you do to be in the lineup? And then you start to find some chemistry with some players, and whether you're on the fourth line or the third line, and you slowly work your way up the ladder to being more important and more important. I think that's really hard for young players to understand, because, you know, as we go to the 2019 draft here in 10 days, and we just had the combine, all those players think they're going to be on the first and second line like next year or the year after. And the reality is it can happen, but it's not going to happen that quick. And they're going to have some adversity along the way, and they have to learn to deal with the adversity. So with Jesse, he's had lots of adversity. Hoping that obviously with a new general manager and a new head coach, and he's a little bit older, he's 21, he's not 18 and 19, that we can get him in the lineup on an every night basis, and he can find some chemistry with some players and earn the coach's trust and become more and more important as we go forward.
The questions are coming fast and furious. One of the more interesting ones, I thought, and I think, again, all three of you probably should take a stab at it. We'll start with Dave. It was directed toward Dave, but I started thinking it's a good question, number one. And number two, it also applies to Ken and Tom. And that is, all three of you are accomplished professionals without seemingly a ton to prove. It's not like you have a nuclear family in Edmonton. So why here? Why take on this challenge? And I think, again, the question was for Tip, but I think it applies to all three of you. Dave, could you start?
Well, as much as things haven't gone as well as they'd like around here for the last few years, from a person looking outside in, there's lots to like here. There's lots and lots of upside. And, you know, I walked away from coaching a couple of years ago, took a year off that I thought I needed a year just to kind of catch my breath. Went to work for Seattle, was enjoying myself, you know, as more an executive role and not the pressures of the everyday coaching. And I missed it. And then as Ken came forward and this opportunity presented itself, I just said, this is a great opportunity. Why would I pass this up? So it's, I think there's tremendous upside here. You watched that game last night and you watched those players pick up that cup, and now you know why you're back. Now I know why I'm back in the game right there. That's why I'm here.
Ken, I imagine your answer is going to mirror that to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, earlier this season in, I don't know, October, November, obviously Steve Yzerman had stepped down in Tampa Bay, and everybody knows what Steve meant to the Detroit Red Wings. I felt that in talking to Chris Ilitch, it was time for change, and as change occurred here in April, I talked, you know, Bob Nicholson reached out to me, and I think for a variety of reasons. Obviously, as Tippett said, there's a great nucleus here, and love the challenge of trying to build a team back into a Stanley Cup contender. I'm a Western Canadian boy. I played junior hockey in Medicine Hat with the Tigers in 73 to 75, and then when I retired as a player, we lived in Medicine Hat for 10 years as I scouted for the Detroit Red Wings. So I'm excited to come to a Canadian team with the Canadian fan base, a great fan base. And my goal before I retire, love to be doing what Doug Armstrong did last night, one more time. So I'm here for that challenge.
Tom, what about you? I mean, you just couldn't get Bob to lose your number? Or he asked you 5 years ago and you said no. He just kept persisting, or why are you here?
I mean, same as these guys. I tried my darndest to say no a number of times. I needed to move it one more time in my life like a hole in my head. But, you know, you look from the outside and you look at this building, this facility, this fan base. Hockey is what it's all about here. This is the cradle of the game here, the gateway to the north. I mean, and you know, the Connors and the core that's here. It's just, you couldn't say no. This is just, we're on the precipice of something really, really cool here, and that's why we're here. And then you see the outcome of all the hard work last night, and you go, how can you not want to be a part of that, you know?
All right, I've got a question for you, Ken, about the mechanisms that can be deployed to improve teams. And your organization in Detroit had an organization take a run at one of your great players, Sergei Fedorov, and I think it cost you guys $23 million, but you won the Stanley Cup that year, 12 in salary and 11 in bonus. On that note, what's your thought process to, I know there's limited space, but deploying buyouts, or conversely, also looking at offer sheets, maybe not at, the $8 to $12 million players, but maybe in the $2.5 to $4 million range. I know you value the draft, and it hasn't really been part of your repertoire in the past to go down that offer sheet route. The game continuously changes.
Buyouts, we're going to look at every, way to create some space to make our team better. Obviously, we got to make that decision here in the next week or 10 days. Offer sheets, I think, again, for the Oilers, I'm not going to do a big-time offer sheet because you start getting into multiple first-round draft picks when you're still trying to build. You'd hate to wake up next year and have a high pick and not own it. So, the $2.5 to $4 million offer sheets, whether it's a second-round pick or a third-round pick, certainly we could look at that. But again, I think we've got to, when I look at our team, we got to get a goaltender. We feel good about our defense. Some of the defensemen last year had injury problems, and it was a tough year, as you all lived it. The coach got fired, and then for the players, they brought in a Hitch and another coach, and then the manager got fired. So we're hoping, we're believing we're going to provide stability. I'm big on stability. I was in Detroit for 36 years as part of the organization. I was the general manager for 22 years. We're going through a rebuilding. I say we, in Detroit, when I was there, they were going through a rebuilding process. And I'd like to think that, you got to have a plan. You got to have a plan where you want to get to and how you're going to get there. Certainly, we've got a plan here for the Edmonton Oilers. On the short term, for the 19-20 season, we want to compete for a playoff spot. We got to get more depth on the back end of up front. We got to do a couple of things, but as we go forward, we want our team to become better and be better than that. And certainly, a lot of that has to happen through the draft. So I will trade draft picks if we need to trade draft picks, but ultimately, if we're going to be good, it's going to be done through the draft, and we got to hang on as many draft picks as we can. But when it's time to be aggressive, we'll be aggressive. I traded 3 first-round picks for Chris Chelios in 1999, so I've traded multiple first. It was 2 firsts and a player that was a first-round draft pick. So you got to assess the timing of it. When's it time to move, and when's it time to be patient? And I'd like to think that my 22 years as being a general manager has allowed me the experiences to live. In 1985, I joined the Red Wings. We had the first pick in the draft, Joe Murphy. So, we won the Stanley Cup in '97, and now the Detroit Red Wings, the last 3 years have missed the playoffs. So over 36 years in Detroit, I've seen down here, up here. We'd won back-to-back in '97, '98. So I've seen everything. I think that's what experience does for you, and that's why I wanted to hire a coach that had experience. That when there's choppy waters and you got tough decisions, he's seen those situations before. I've seen those situations before.